Ivory Coast, the world's top cocoa producer, is facing supply crisis due to below average rainfall and extreme heat threatening the April to September mid-crop. And this morning, to talk about this, I'm being joined by Isaac Agyei, who is an analyst at SBM Intelligence in Ghana. Mr. Agyei, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So how significant is the impact of these weather uncertainties that are set to be affecting cocoa production in Ivory Coast?
Well, this year's, weather uncertainties is really wide. If you look at the total number of production regions that the current drought is affecting, 13 regions in the Ivory Coast, and definitely that's the world's biggest producer of cocoa. And in fact, last season when we saw prices rallying, although both Ghana and Ivory Coast had productions dropping, it was the fact that Ivory Coast was still producing about 1 million tons that saved the world in terms of, not letting the price cross to, let's say, 13 or 14 or 15, thousand tons, per ton. I mean, if you look at the current situation in Ivory Coast, for instance, this is not the first time we're experiencing this, but we checked the data and you could see that the reason why this year's, droughts could have an adverse effect in terms of the magnitude of the impact is the total number of regions that it is currently affecting. It's widespread. And in fact, you have rainfall still in Ivory Coast and Ghana, but it's falling in wrong, places. For instance, in Ghana, you have rains in the capitals where, usually you would not have rains in January or February. And in areas or the deciduous areas where cocoa is produced, where you need that amount of rainfall, you are not really having it this year. And the same thing is happening in Ivory Coast. And the fear is that if Ivory Coast, which is currently not really doing forward sales on the global perspective at the moment, if production is affected, it could have prices rise, above $15,000 per ton.
One big money spinner for Ivory Coast. Isaac, I said, how would this affect the country's economy, looking at the fact that cocoa production is a money spinner for it?
It's the mainstay of Ivory Coast economy, and that is one of the commodities in terms of the big foreign exchange earners. Cocoa is one of them, if not number one. Cocoa is so important to Ivory Coast. It's not just the economy, but it's a strategic commodity at the moment. And so the Ivorian economy is still doing well. One of the few economies in West Africa still having a single-digit inflation. But in terms of their geopolitical positioning, this could have an adverse effect on the power of Ivory Coast in terms of, their geopolitical positioning in the cocoa trade on a global scale. And if you look at the Ivorian, economy, for instance, this year they were really dependent on cocoa to bring in the much needed, forex, for the exchange rates that, stabilize their currency. Although not like Ghana, that cocoa, when cocoa falls, you see the same, you see like, an equal, effect in the performance of the local currency. Ivory Coast is a bit different. But in terms of revenue, in terms of how the economy performs, cocoa is so big, and this drop could have a serious, impact on the health of the Ivorian economy.
And this draws to question, or to the limelight, the issue around climate change and its attendant effect. But then how do you feel that we've not really seen some sort of solid commitments from the superpowers, so to speak, in dealing with issues around climate change that cause these situations?
It's unfortunate that currently we are seeing that US might be pulling out very soon. And that means that we might still, continue to have some of these headlines going forward in the future. Once climate change is not really tackled, if you look at the global carbon, emission or the production, in our part of the world, we don't really produce like the big giants or the superpowers who produce, millions and different, significant volumes of carbon emissions. But we are feeling the pinch, especially in West Africa, not just Ivory Coast, right? If you look at Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast itself that is into cocoa production, you see that this is really affecting the industry. And know that when you do not have support in terms of dealing with climate change, it doesn't just affect cocoa production, but once cocoa production comes down, sweet tooth will be affected. It will affect different brands, will affect different products, and has a geopolitical, it has a widespread implication on the global scale. And so once US is not really ready to be in the fight against climate change, which the current president has termed it as a hoax, we do not see how the fights will be, because we know that the US is a big donor in terms of, contributing to the fight against climate change. And so for us to be in this position at this moment, I think that the only thing we can see is a big fear and a big impact, especially on the production of certain commodities like cocoa and coffee in West Africa.
All right, so can alternative suppliers such as probably Ghana or Nigeria offset the shortfall, or should we just brace for some sort of global supply chain disruptions?
I think a brace at the moment is what we should expect, because Ghana is not coming in. It's not coming into the picture. Why? Because we are still producing below 500,000 tons. The last season, Ghana produced roughly 55,000 tons. It is way below what it produced in 2021, which was more than 1 million metric tons. So that tells you that alternatives are even not coming to the picture. And if you look at Ghana, for instance, you still have illegal mining being a big problem. Which is taking, illegal miners are still taking over, cocoa farms, and the same weather conditions in Ivory Coast. Ghana is not immune to it. We are seeing rainfall in Ghana, but we are seeing the rain falling in the places where we possibly may not need it at the moment. And in terms of looking at Ghana's, default in terms of its supply of cocoa beans to its traders in the just ended season, it means that Ghana is in deficit. It means that it must find, beans to offset what they actually defaulted in 2023-2024 season, leaving a very small space for it to even come in to support the global supply, demand at the moment, the global demand at the moment. And so it's a dicey situation for both Ghana and Ivory Coast. Usually we say that both countries account for over 60% of the world production. But if you disaggregate it, you realize that Ivory Coast is more than 45%, and Ghana doing somewhere 14% or 15%. So it means that once Ivory Coast begins to fall, and the time that we might see Ivory Coast producing below 1 million tons a year, that tells you that, we are in for a big trouble at the moment.
That's quite interesting, because you've mentioned, you've actually talked about how this would affect Ivory Coast finances. We're talking about the potential drop in GDP and, of course, how it would affect trade balance of the country. But then are there other aspects of the country's economy that it can focus on for now, pending the time we see some changes in the cocoa production value chain?
You see, Ivory Coast is taking a different position. So they are not just, unlike Ghana, that is really focused on exporting raw cocoa beans. Ivory Coast is now going into processing. So it tells you that even if they produce the volumes that used to leave the shores of Ivory Coast as raw, cocoa beans has been reduced. And you have a $100 million factory in Ivory Coast. Some say sponsored by the Chinese government, currently doing a lot of processing. It tells you that the country strategically has already taken a decision, and they know cocoa is a mainstay of their economy, and so they want to take advantage of the global, what is happening in the global scale. Ivory Coast and Ghana this year are not really doing forward sales. That makes it so difficult for trading houses and other companies to take advantage of rallying prices, because the two companies who would have sold their beans in advance for you to take advantage have taken a different position, where Ghana is doing self-financing, not longer taking loans from the cocoa syndicated loan market. Ivory Coast, on the other hand, is not focusing on processing. So they already have a strategy, and then maybe this might work. And it's not only cocoa that Ivory Coast depends on. They depend on other, commodities in the country. But definitely the fact that they've taken a decision to go into cocoa processing, not just exporting the raw beans, for me is significant, and that's a good strategy for the country going forward.
So where does that leave the school of thought or the speculation that there are still fundamental weaknesses in Ivory Coast's cocoa farming system that makes it increasingly vulnerable to climate shocks?
Definitely, I mean, it's clear. It's clear that one thing you cannot control is the weather. And that's why I think you asked a very important question, how the superpowers will come in to help us fight this, the climate change and its adverse effects on agriculture, for instance. And at the moment, the fact that we cannot control climate change, the only thing Ivory Coast can really control or have control over will be to reduce smuggling, not just in Ivory Coast, but in Ghana as well. For instance, in Ghana, you lose close to about 150,000 tons of cocoa beans to smuggling. And I think that is the only thing that both countries can control at the moment. We are seeing illegal mining also stretching from the western part of Ghana into Ivory Coast. And they definitely would have to take action before it becomes escalated like we have that same situation in Ghana. But in terms of the climate situation, it's unfortunate that we might not have any sort of control over. And I think that both countries must extend production through getting more, lands and changing the method of production where you solely do not have to depend on the natural weather at the moment. We've seen what is going on in China where, they do not really depend on the weather conditions to produce cocoa. And we've all seen how when Brazil, once upon a time, was the world's biggest producer, was heavily dependent on the natural weather. And we've all seen how Brazil has actually dwindled in terms of cocoa production. So that is a big warning for both countries. It's just a matter of time that we might have the effect of climate change not really helping Ghana and Ivory Coast bringing out their best production levels in terms of the global cocoa production.
Invariably, you're talking about a technology-driven cocoa production value chain in Ivory Coast, but does it seem as though the government is willing to optimize that particular sector?
Well, at the moment, Ivory Coast is looking for investors. And if you look at the current posture of the country, it tells you that they know that once you have other competitors, or let me say other pepper substitutes like Ghana and Cameroon not really producing at the high level that they used to produce, it positions Ivory Coast in a very, strategic, corner where they can take advantage, because already they are the world's biggest producer. They account for more than 45% of global production. So they know that when they take advantage of, technology, and they take advantage of not just exporting the cocoa in its raw form, but process it and also establish a middle, let's say the middleman market in Ivory Coast, where currently it exists in Europe, where in Amsterdam and other places like Switzerland, where they control, the trading of cocoa. They get the raw beans from Africa, they process it and take advantage of the middleman market. Ivory Coast wants to come into that market. They don't just want to produce the beans and that is it. They really want to move from just production to now processing the cocoa beans and taking advantage of the market. That's why they are investing and looking for investors. We know of the $100 million investment that I said about, and the other ones coming in, and they really want to move from just production to now processing as well.
All right, we hope that that kind of investment, of course, will be secured over the couple of months in the country to scale up production in that sector. Thank you so much, Isaac Agyei, an analyst at SBM Intelligence in Ghana. It was nice talking to you.